right, welcome back to the Everything HR podcast. Today we are welcoming Craig Dunaway, the COO of Penn Station, East Coast Subs. I'm excited to have you here, Craig. You're actually our first guest with our new segment here at Everything HR, the Culinary Conversations. And the goal is really just speaking to leaders and kind of in the restaurant world to discuss the hardships and some of the successes that they've overcome in growing their restaurant. So just a little bit about Penn Station itself. Opened the first store back in 1985 and grew to 320 locations, now in 14 states. They have around 2,000 employees and a revenue of $415 million, but that was from 2021, so there might be some changes up to now. So Craig, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Really honored to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. So as the COO of Penn Station, do you mind just giving me kind of a high-level overview of exactly what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So what do I do? So you're right. My title is Chief Operating Officer, but don't think of it in the traditional sense of overseeing operations. I run the company. I run Penn Station. We've got, as you said, 321 locations. We only have actually one company-owned unit, so we're mostly franchised. And we've got approximately 70 franchisees. As you said, we're in 14 states. So when you take a look at system-wide sales, it's an amalgamation of all of our franchisee sales, and same with the employees. I mean, from a Penn Station Inc. standpoint, including the one company-owned unit we have about 50 employees overall. But system-wide, we're up close to 5,000 employees in the system now. So we're really proud of that.
That's awesome. Okay, so franchising is your main method of scaling the business. What franchise kind of structure do you have with all of your franchisees?
So when you get into franchising, I mean, you're leasing a system from the franchisor, right? And I think that's very important for, for somebody looking to get into franchising. I mean, you're buying a model for a 20-year period, and so you want to make sure that really there's a system and a procedure for everything. So what we do is we give franchisees the playbook, which is our operating manual. And we source all of the products so they don't have to do anything like that. We create the menu, uh, and then they operate it. And we give them the tools and the training in order to operate that system, hopefully successfully for a 20-year period.
Okay. Is that like the goal of the relationship with your franchisees is 20 years?
It is. I mean, our franchise agreements are structured in 4 5 year increments. But when you franchise with somebody as the franchisor, you're really looking for a long-term relationship. I mean, it does no one any good for someone to get in the system and then as the franchisor, you try to get rid of them after 5 years, or vice versa, where they don't want to be in the system. So what that really means is that the vetting process is unbelievably critical and important. And we spend a lot of time with franchisees early on, getting to know them. It's like a marriage, and candidly, it's probably easier to get out of a marriage than it is to get out of a franchising relationship because of that contract. And so, we want people who are passionate about food. We want people who are passionate about the brand, really brand zealots, because it's not passive. I mean, this is a full-time job for the franchisee. And, it's not like buying a piece of real estate and collecting a rent check once a month. You have to take care of every guest every day. And, it just so happens in our particular situation that our average ticket's about $13. And so, if you go in to lunch and you spend $13 and you have a great experience, the next customer who comes in has to have that same great experience for $13. And then that accumulates into a day's worth of sales. So it's hard, and it's unique. It's not necessarily an intellect thing. It's paying attention to the details, micromanaging the pennies, because this is a pennies business, and taking care of each guest.
Awesome. And I know that at least from my understanding with franchises, customer satisfaction and specifically quality control is one of the biggest kind of headaches. Do you guys notice that at all, or is your system set up in a way that, like you said, micromanaging at your level as far as the corporation, what does that relationship kind of look like?
Well, We as the franchisor, what we do is I'm gonna answer your question two different ways. One from the franchisor's perspective, but um, when you take a look at the customer, and I'll talk about during COVID, what really used to happen prior to COVID was that any restaurant told customers how they were going to get their food. And it basically meant you either walked in and dine in experience, or you took your food to go. And then COVID hit, and basically all of the restaurants in the country, were not allowed to have customers for a long period of time. And that meant the customer then started dictating how they wanted to receive their food. And so some people wanted third party, some people wanted web ordering, some people still wanted to walk in and carry it out, some people wanted to call in. And really, what's transpired, I would say the evolution of the customer is it's gone from brands telling customers how they're going to get their food to customers really dictating how they want their food. And so that's probably been the biggest change that we've seen, over the last 3 years. You have to be where the customer is, really kind of play where they want to play, which means get them the food they want to get it, or they're just going to go somewhere else. And so when you talk about that guest experience, one of the things that we do at Penn Station is, I think it's pretty unique, is we have an evaluation system. It's called performance evaluation. That's 1,000 points scoring system. And it evaluates what you were talking about a few minutes ago, the quality of the product. How is the franchisee making the food? Is it being made in accordance with our standards? How are they handling the guest experience? Are they greeting them when they walk in the door? Are they getting the food in front of the guest within 5 or 6 minutes? And so the performance evaluation is really simply stated. It's 1,000 point scoring system where we, excuse me, where we evaluate the restaurant between 6 and 8 times per year, and we leave a set of notes to the franchisee or to the restaurant so they know how they're performing. And simply stated, it's we have an ops manual that has ideal standards in it, and the performance evaluations communicates how well you're performing against those standards.
Gotcha. I mean, you gave a few great nuggets of info right there, like actionable things that restaurant owners and entrepreneurs can utilize to either improve their own franchise or to set up their own franchise, or just in general, like any restaurant. The first one that I noticed that kind of like came to me was where you were discussing the multiple methods of communicating with the customer. Do they want to come in person? Are they going to call? Would they rather do web? Are they going to use third party? So having multiple ways to communicate with your customer and then get them kind of what is most convenient for them, I think that's something that any restaurant could adopt and immediately improve kind of their entire operation. So I just wanted to say, like, I really like that.
Well, I appreciate that. I just think guests fall into habits, their own personal habits. And if you are a mom or dad with two kids in the car and you can't get out, you need to go to the drive-through. And for other people, I happened to be at a Starbucks a few weeks ago, and I was watching the way customers obtain their coffee. And I was really blown away that it was three distinct methods. It was people going to the drive-through. It was people walking in who had placed their order in advance and they just picked it up off the counter. And it was people who walked in, walked up to the counter, placed their order, and paid. And I firmly believe that if you are not playing in all of those channels like that as a restaurant concept, you're just going to lose guests. If you don't have ease of order ability through your online portal, they're going to go somewhere else. And if you don't have third party delivery when they go to one of the third party app providers, then they're just going to order from somebody else. So you have to play in all those channels today. And it wasn't like that 5 and 6 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the restaurant industry is really interesting because it's a traditional industry in which it's existed for such a long time, but it also doesn't adopt a lot of the traditional business structures like human resources and certain operations. I'm curious, have you worked in any other industries other than food and beverage?
So my background's actually public accounting, and I was a partner at a firm in Louisville, Kentucky. I was in public accounting for 15 years, and I'll segue and tell you how I got into the restaurant space. Back in a little older than you are, back in the 80s, a buddy of mine and came to a friend and I worked together in public accounting, and another buddy of ours came to us and was looking to become a Papa John's franchisee. And he asked us, excuse me, if we would put some projections together for him. And we did, and liked what we saw. And we said, you know what? Let's become Papa John's franchisees. So we were in our 20s, met with Papa John's, liked what they had to say. And that was my introduction into the restaurant space. And I stayed in public accounting full time in Louisville. And the restaurants that we opened were in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we had 11 of them that we eventually opened over about a 10-year period. And I was in Cincinnati every weekend working on our restaurants, and then back to public accounting on a full-time job Monday through Friday and Saturday during tax season. And so that really exposed me to the restaurant space about how this is such a penny's business. It's a penny's business with food cost, and it's a penny's business with labor cost in particular, because the margins can be so thin in the space. You have to control all of those on a daily basis. And you have to really control all of those with each order that goes out. So for example, if a small sandwich has, let's call it 3 ounces or 4 ounces of meat on it, and you walk in and they happen to put 6 ounces on your sandwich, they can't not put any meat on the next sandwich to make up for it. And so that's where it really kind of becomes the land of lost opportunity, and on the food cost side. And on the labor, you just have to manage that with, looking at it. And we look at it in 15-minute increments at Penn Station, and we have a scheduling program for the franchisees so that they can look at it that way, because you have to control that, not daily, you have to control it hourly, or you're never going to maximize your return.
Gotcha. Do you mind going a little bit deeper into that 15-minute split?
Sure. So, what you figure that most of the restaurants in our system open at 10:30 in the morning. Not all of them, but most of them. And you really don't need to have 5 people on your schedule at 10:30, because scales. I mean, not everybody eats lunch at 10:30 in the morning. So your lunch is going to scale between 10:30 and 1 p.m. And you have to stage when people come in. And so it's very important for you to take a look at that and just not say, okay, for lunch, I need 5 people for lunch, but you don't need 5 people between 10:30 and 1. You need maybe one person between 10:30 and 11, 2 people between 11 and 11:30, and then you may have your next person come in at 11:45. And so you're really scaling up to have that 5 full people at lunch. And if you don't do that and you don't schedule it that way, you're just going to spend excess labor, and you're never going to maximize the return you have. So the way to do that is to control it in those 15-minute increments. And then on the other side, your lunch is going to slowly die off between the 1 and 2 period, where you may need only 4 people at 1:30, and then you may need 3 people at 2. And then typically between 2 and 5, that midday rush, you may only need 2 or 3 people, but you have to control those in those 15-minute increments to maximize your return.
Awesome. Gotcha. So I'm assuming that you guys identified trends and then you forecasted these numbers based off of individual stores, or is it more of like a blanketed, most locations follow these metrics in which, 11 o'clock, like you said, that's when people really start having lunch and then you kind of bring it up? Or is it case by case?
It's really case by case, store by store, but you can look at the trends. You need to look at the trends on day parts. The way we define day parts are lunch, midday, dinner, and late night. And so you can't look at it on a macro scale of your market per se or your company. You have to look at it on an individual store level basis. And so you're looking at the trends of how do we perform each day, right? Each day of the week, because Monday performs differently than Friday does. Friday and Saturday are typically 2 of the busiest days of the week, and Mondays can be slower. So in order to forecast, I mean, really what you're doing is what we do is we tend to look at the trends over the last 3 to 4 weeks. And the last 3 to 4 weeks of trends are pretty good predictors of what the next week is going to look like. And so typically that's the way a manager is going to perform their scheduling. You're going to put your schedule out a week in advance, and you're going to look at those trends for the previous 3 or 4 weeks to determine that schedule. It's, the other thing I think it's important is, I mean, you can't treat the employees as a commodity, right? I mean, you're talking about HR, and you have to understand the employee and their needs. I mean, the high school athlete is different than the mom who needs to work 40 hours or who may need to get time off for babysitters. And so it's not just putting numbers on a schedule, it's also importantly understanding the needs of your crew and what expectations they have, both financially, time off, etc. It's a matrix and not just so simple.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then, so regarding HR and some of your operations, is it more the franchisor responsible for all of their own hiring, like the franchisees? Are they responsible for their own hiring? They're responsible for kind of like following the operational playbook, um, but they are doing the rent, they are taking care of food, they're doing everything else.
Yeah, the employees in the system. I mean, I mentioned there's about 5,000 employees in the Penn Station system, and the employees are the employees of the franchisees. I mean, we don't have any responsibility for them. We don't have any hiring responsibility or firing responsibility or anything like that. It's up to the franchisee to follow our system, but to create their own culture. And so, when you take a look at 321 restaurants and 70 franchisees, there's really, while it's a model, each franchisee is creating the culture that they want within their organization. So we leave notes. I talked about the performance evaluation notes we leave. The performance evaluation notes from a personnel standpoint really only go as far as discussing the sufficiency of management. And the sufficiency of management is there just so that they can execute the model. But we don't get into ranking of their employees or saying Jimmy's not a good employee, Jimmy does a bad job. We just say that these sandwiches weren't made well. And then it's really up to the franchisee to look at who made them poorly, who didn't follow the system, because we don't want to get involved in their personnel, issues. We did now, in fairness to that, we have a very robust training program, and we do give the franchisees that. So, we have stations. If you take a look at a Penn Station restaurant, and there's 7 stations, and we have developed training processes for each of those stations, and then we've developed tests, to evaluate how well the employee knows that station and performs their function. But it's up to the franchisee to execute that training system. And I would be remiss if I didn't say we've won awards for our training program. So I think we've done really, really well with it. I mean, on an international basis, where very, very large companies across the world are participating in this, and we've won awards for that. But it's up to the franchisee ultimately to execute that.
Okay, awesome. I mean, you said a lot of things that were specific to HR, but kind of connect directly with the operations as well. You said culture multiple times, discussed performance observations, training and development. All of those are functions of HR in one realm or another. Because at the end of the day, human resources is based off of the functions that it does, not necessarily a specific definition, but it's how you manage the people, right? It's how you lead your team. I think that the formula that you guys have is clearly working. I mean, you're scaling up. Do you think there's any tidbits or anything, any like tricks or ideas that someone either first starting out or who has a current franchise or maybe independent scaling could adopt and improve their own situations?
Well, when I was a Papa John's franchisee, we had 11 locations. And then I got involved in Penn Station because I tried the food and loved it. And my partner and I decided to bring Penn Station to Louisville. And over the course of about 14 years or so, we opened 15 locations. And in answer to your question, what you have to do is you have to create an organizational structure. And, every manager has a unique personality. Every manager manages people differently. Every manager leads people differently. Some are very hard, old school, think Bob Knight, and some of them are players, coaches. And so, what's very important is to have an organizational culture. And what I used to say when I was the franchisee down in Louisville, and I would get with my managers, we would talk about how we wanted employees to interact with each other. It was, I want you to treat all of our female employees like you would treat your daughter. I want you to treat all of your male employees like you would treat your son. I want you to treat every customer, female customer, like you would treat your mother. I want you to treat every male customer like it's your father. And it was really trying to invoke in the culture an organization of respect and treat people the way they want to be treated and try to put it on a personal level for them. And, in the restaurant space, you want everybody to have fun. But if you have 15 restaurants, you want the cultural experience for the guest to be the same in restaurant one or restaurant 15. And that the experience of the food is following the ops manual. But I think the experience of the guest and the experience of the employee has to come from the top and say, this is what we expect as an organization of how people are supposed to be treated.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the idea of building a culture. Like every organization has their own culture, whether they realize it or not. And the thing that I think that is misunderstood about the culture of a business is that you can change it specifically top down. Like it's the leadership that puts in places the policies and procedures, the training, the observations. It's really the accountability of this is what we're going to do, and then now I'm going to make sure that everyone does it the way we do it. And then that's how you actually build a culture, which I love the way that you framed it because it's something that I think that restaurants, specifically restaurants, just because it's such a difficult industry. Like when you're so focused on the margins, when you're so focused on, the pennies, it's really hard to think big and to like focus on culture, but that is exactly what is needed to succeed. Like that's what is needed to get kind of where we need to go.
Yeah, I mean, people want to be a part of a team, right? And they want to be a part of a winning team, and that culture is, one of the things that we strive for at Penn Station, and we strive for with our franchisee. It's honesty and integrity, and that's just not lip service. And I think that you have to create a culture where you are explaining to people what's going on, particularly in times of crisis. And what we do, the way I've always led is don't tell me all the things that are going well. Tell me the things that aren't going well so we can fix them and make them better. And we had a credit card breach back in 2012, and it was a big deal at the time. I mean, it's not like credit card breaches are now, where it seems like every other day in the news you read about something that's happened. And I told our attorneys that I was going to communicate with our franchisees what was going on because I knew they were worried, they were scared. They didn't know if it was going to cost them money or not cost them money. But I said we are going to be honest with these franchisees and let them know everything going on, the good and bad. And I fought with our attorneys over it because no, you need to be careful here. They need to know. And if you don't tell people what's going on, and if you're not honest with them, the rumor mill is going to start, and there's just going to be a bunch of gossip. And sometimes the gossip's real and sometimes it's fake, but you need to lead from the top and you need to explain what's happening. And you need to be able to answer all their questions and relieve the fear that people could have. And then honesty and integrity needs to carry over with your employees, with your suppliers, with your guests. And I think if you lead with that in mind, it doesn't mean you're not going to have problems. There's always going to be problems. But if you go into a relationship knowing that there's honesty and integrity there, when somebody tells you something, you can take it to the bank and say, oh, that's just a bill of goods. They're lying to me. No, you can't do that and succeed in business. You just can't do it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, just the focus on culture, the focus on quality control. Like, in my opinion, HR and operations have to work together. Like, it's not one or the other. You have the front end, you have the back end of the business. Both are needed to grow the company. And I think that your organization is a perfect example of what it looks like when they both work together. Most of the things that you've discussed have been HR functions. It's been the recruiting as far as the team goes. It's been the training development, the performance observation, the culture. And I think that understanding that those are the keys that are actually needed for long-term success is something that isn't very commonly seen in the restaurant industry. I mean, I know the latest statistics is about 60% of restaurants fail. And what is kind of your opinion on some of the main reasons why that is?
Well, I think it's a variety of reasons. I mean, this space is very, very hard, and it is a penny's business. And I think first you got to have a great product, right? You have to have something that's scalable that people want to come back for. And that's really the guest experience. And you need to be able to create a model that that you can make money with, right? I mean, that sounds so simple to say, but I see a lot of startup concepts that they've got a great product, but they really haven't scaled their model to be profitable. And if you're not profitable, you're just not going to sustain it for the long term. And again, I know that sounds simple, but you really in this space, you have to be able to micromanage every penny. Pennies have to be important to you in the restaurant space. That 15 minutes that we talked about 10 minutes or so ago on the labor hours, that has to be important to you. And a little example I'll use with Penn Station. I mean, if we have a small fry, and a small fry should really go out with 2 packs of ketchup. Well, what happens if a small fry goes out with 5 packs of ketchup, right? Every small fry every day has 3 more packs of ketchup than it should have. 3 packs of ketchup is collectively, is that much? No, it's pennies. But what happens if you do that 150 times a day? Over 358 days a year, it is thousands and thousands of dollars. And what happens if you put 4 slices of tomato on a sandwich instead of 3? Is it a big deal? Yeah, because it's 33% more tomato on every sandwich that goes out with tomatoes. And all of those individual components add up to tens of thousands of dollars. And so you have to build a model that acknowledges that, and there has to be a system and a process for everything. Everything that you do, how you open the restaurant, how you close the restaurant, how you make a sandwich, how you bake bread, everything has to have a system and procedure and not leave it up to people to figure out on their own.
That is awesome. I love it. I love the ideas. I love how you're framing it in a way that people can really understand. Because the purpose of this podcast is to help restaurant owners, entrepreneurs, and other leaders figure out how to improve themselves and how to figure out how to be successful. 60% is too much. One of the goals of our podcast is lowering that percentage. So breaking this down in a way that I think is very easy to understand. First off, the product, right? So the actual food itself has to be good. Number one, if your food's not good, no one's going to come. The second one's service, right? So from there, the service itself, what exactly is the customer satisfaction? How are our team members engaging with our customers? What does that relationship look like? Because if we get repeat customers, that is a lot of what it is that requires to grow. And then from there, it's processes. So once the food is good, once we know that we're able to actually interact with people and people enjoy coming in, like that's the next big part is making sure that we have specific systems in place that is able to fully grow, focusing on the pennies because the pennies are what matters. That's where you make your money is in those pennies. And it's by creating the specific operations that keep everything uniform. And I think that that cannot be understated because one of the reasons why restaurants can scale as large as they are is that people know when I go there, I know what it's going to taste like. Like it may not be, a 5 star or something like that, but I know when I go there, that is exactly what I'm going to get. It's my regular, it's like my comfort food, and that's I think the relationship that is so important with each customer.
Well, and those things meld together. What you described well, and it melds together when you've got a great culture, because without the great culture, what you just described doesn't matter. But if you don't have great food, great service, right, and the systems to back it up, then the culture is not going to matter. They have to come together as one, and it comes from the top. It's it's as simple as making sure that you have sharp knives to cut the bread. I mean, who wants to work in an environment with a dull knife, right? You're cutting 200 loaves of bread a day and the knife's dull. I mean, that's part of culture. And it's understanding all of those unique little things. And I think it's emotional intelligence. I mean, you've asked me a lot of really good questions about culture, and you need to create an environment where you would want to work. And if you don't want to work in that environment, why do you think somebody else is going to want to work there?
That is awesome. I love it. Culture is huge here. We talk about it all the time just because of how important I think it is. And then as far as HR for the individual organizations, do you know, are most of them using third parties? Is it the owner or the franchisee who's doing all the recruiting, who's doing all the performance observations? What does that structure kind of look like?
It's both. It's both. I mean, some franchisees recognize that their strength is not hiring and firing. So they will, they will use a third party for that for recruitment, or they will turn it over to one of their team members who's very good at that. But it's really a mixed bag. It's having that emotional intelligence to recognize your strength or not, and then setting expectations with the person. I think I happened to be at a restaurant last night with my wife, and I was watching a server train another employee, and I thought they really did a nice job walking them through the process. But conversely, I've been at restaurants where you can tell the new employee has not been trained at all, and they just fumble. And I feel bad for them. It's not their fault. It was leadership's fault they didn't give them training. You clock them in, you give them an apron, or you give them a uniform and say, "Here, have at it." And that's not the way to execute it. It goes back to much of what you brought up today. It's you have to train people and give them the expectations of what we're trying to do. And it's the story of, I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's a story from, I think, 17 or 1800s, maybe even earlier, where you got somebody walking down a sidewalk and they are talking to an individual who's putting bricks on a wall. And he said, "Wait," and so the guy says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm, laying bricks." And he goes a little further and there's somebody else. And he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm building a wall." And he goes a little further and he talked to the third person and he says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "We are building a church. And this is the wall that's going around that church." And so the last person got it. He got what his role was and his purpose. It was a greater good of building a church for mankind. And the first guy, he just didn't get it. And I think that's what's so important in the industry, is to explain the greater good of what we're trying to accomplish with the food, with the service, with the operations and the expectation.
That is such a great concept because you're absolutely right. Having the entire vision being public so that way everyone knows the goal they're striving for, that is something that I think is missing, not just in the restaurant industry, but like in every industry. Like it's not done enough. And then you see all these large enterprises, these large corporations, they're the ones doing it, and it's almost like they found the secret sauce. Like, no, everyone has to realize that their specific position is important because you have a cashier, and traditionally it's viewed as like the person who is underpaid cashier isn't important. It's like, well, that's not the case. That is the person that is specifically speaking to each individual customer. That is your brand representative. Like, do you want them thinking that they are not important? That is absolutely the last thing that we want to do.
Right. Well, corporately, if you were to go around our corporate office and ask everyone their job, one of the things that they would say is that, our responsibility is to maximize the return on investment for franchisees. Because if franchisees aren't making money, they're not going to open more restaurants. And we hired someone who's does an awesome job for us. She's our receptionist and manages the upfront process. And I was talking to her one of the first days, and she said, "I'm just the person who answers the phone." I'm like, "No, no, you're not. You are the voice of Penn Station. Every customer that comes in, you touch. Every franchisee who comes in, you touch. Any supplier who walks in the door, you're the first one to see them. You've got a big responsibility." And I think if you approach it from that standpoint, in your example, the cashier, the cashier is going to ultimately set the tone for the experience of that guest. Now you got to execute on everything else, but they're going to be the initial setting of the tone of how that guest perceives your brand or your business or your restaurant.
Yeah, it's such a powerful perception because that's really all it is. It's someone who's doing the same job, but that perception, you're giving them equity in the business. Like you're giving them the understanding that no, 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 you are important. Like you specifically are pushing our direction forward to reach all these specific goals. And I think aligning the training, the accountability, and then that understanding, that is everything that you need to have long-term success and improve the business by leaps and bounds, really, because like you said, it's culture. That is what creates the understanding of this is my role. I'm doing this because X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, every job matters. If it didn't, it wouldn't be there. Like, no one's spending money on something that doesn't matter. Like you said, pennies matter. There's no way that we'd be dishing out cash for this.
Well, and there's 900,000 restaurants in the country, right? And if you don't execute every day, the guest is just going to go somewhere else. There's too many choices today compared to 25 years ago or 20 years ago. And because the guest wants to get their food a certain way, you have to execute on each of those channels. And it's more difficult than it was. It really is more difficult than it was 5 and 10 years ago.
So, I mean, sounds like someone first starting out, they have kind of a play-by-play on what they need. The food has to be there, the service has to be there, the culture has to be there, the training, and then from there, the policies, so that way you can do it the same every time. I mean, what would you say to someone who is specifically looking to franchise? Because franchising and then independent scaling, they kind of have similarities, but they are a different ball game because in one case you have to fully trust someone that you don't necessarily have full control over to represent your brand. I know that's a big fear of a lot of people is that customer quality, that control and letting go of that control, trusting someone else to represent you and something that you've built up, that can be very scary. Any kind of thoughts on that?
Well, what I would do is what I've done twice, and I'm not telling you I'm right. I'm just telling you what I've done. I would look at a proven model. I would want a system that has shown longevity over time. And, I would not want to get in too early on the ground floor. I would want to make sure that the model that I'm investing in is scalable. I would intimately want to get to know management and feel comfortable with them because, as I said, several minutes ago, it's really a marriage and you have to feel comfortable with management and you want to know how you want to know the longevity of management and the brand. I mean, is it a constant revolving door of the people running the company? Because if it is, that's telling you something about their culture. Or, what are who are the stakeholders and how long have they been around? And I'm proud of the fact that at Penn Station, our founder, Jeff Osterfeld, I mean, we're going on our 40th year, next year, and Jeff's still around. And I've been at Penn Station for 25 years running the company, and our president, Lance Mont's been there 20. And if you were to go around the office and say, how long has this person been here and what do they do? It's longevity. And people just don't stick in environments for the long haul if it's not a great culture. And so if I were getting into a franchised opportunity, that's what I would want to understand. Do I like the product? Can I make money at the product? And what's management like? Because those are the people that I'm going to be dealing with all the time. What's their relationship like with their suppliers? I mean, we have suppliers who have been with us 30 and 35 years, and we don't treat them as commodities. You have to treat, you treat it as just an acquisition, a purchase, and it boils down to pennies. You're never going to get the results you want when there's trouble. When there's a problem that's going on and it boils down to money, you're going to, in my opinion, you're going to lose. So that treating the person with respect and understanding that, if I were getting a system, that's what I would evaluate today, all of those things.
That is fantastic. And I think that that's really powerful because it actually helps both sides. It helps the franchisee because it helps them understand, like, okay, this is what I should look for if I want to join a franchise. I should look for how long have they been in business? What is their model? Who is their leadership? How long have they been there? But then as a franchisor, it also helps you, like that same exact dynamic, because it gives you the understanding these are the things that they are looking for. So we need to make sure that we actually match all those boxes. And that also gives something that the newer franchises, it gives them something to strive for. It gives them something like an actionable goal that they can actually try to reach with enough time and effort. So I think that it's a very solid casing that actually just that one like small statement is something that can actually help multiple people in different angles because it's something that, like you said, it makes sense. Like it's something that people look at with experience – and it's a way to keep people safe who may not have the experience.
Well, and I would, if I were getting in a system today, what I would do is I would want to talk to existing franchisees in the system, and I would actually want to talk to people who have exited the system. Why did you get out? And if you talk to two or three who have gotten out or two or three in the system, you're going to get a really, really good feel for the organization as a whole, in my opinion. And we one of the things that we do that we're proud of is we do annual evaluations, and we send to the managing owner who runs the business, we send them evaluation to see how well we're doing. And we also do it with the general managers, and the general managers are more day to day. The owners, it's bigger picture. How's the brand performing? What do you like and not like? And at the manager level, it's how's the bread been? How's the lettuce? How's our proteins? But we also do an independent survey. It's anonymous through Franchise Business Review, and they do it annually, and they poll our franchisees anonymously, and it covers everything. It covers management, culture, product, how well we're performing on technology, marketing, everything. And I'm proud of the fact that every year we do it, we receive awards because we rank higher than the industry. But I think you have to know how people are feeling and what they think of you, and then you've got to be able to fix those problems. We don't do it to pat ourselves on the back. We do it to make ourselves a better organization. Because again, I've said this a couple of times, we're selling return on investment, and if franchisees are making money, they will continue to grow. And if they're not making money, they're not going to grow, and then we have nothing to sell. So taking a pulse annually, I think, is really, really smart for us.
Absolutely. I mean, getting that communication, that feedback, that is everything. Because you never know what direction to go to if you're not getting feedback from the people that matter, right? So I completely agree with the way that you guys do it, doing those pulse interviews, those surveys. That's absolutely a perfect way to make sure that you're in a continuous feedback loop. You're actually getting the information that you need to then fix it, right? If there's something that's negative, you're able to bring it up, and if there's something that's positive that you find out, then you're able to, maybe represent that part of your marketing, receiving awards for your training. Like those are all things that you're doing well. So you can either double down on those or improve the ones you need to improve on. So
Well, I think two specific examples of that. I mean, if I'm polling 70 franchisees and one person has numerous complaints about whatever, and no one else is complaining about it, I know it's not the problem's that person. And so you need to talk to them to find out what's wrong. And I was telling you, before we got on air about I get copied on every customer complaint. And I do that because I want to see trends. I want to see trends with what's going on in a franchisee's company, or what's going on in a market, or what's going on in the brand as a whole. And I think if you keep your finger close to that pulse, you can learn, you can really, really learn a lot. And so conversely, if we poll the franchisees and 10 of them have the same complaint, we've got a problem that we need to fix. And so you're looking for the outliers on either side of that.
absolutely. And you only know that if you're targeting a large enough market, like if you're reaching out to enough people where that information matters. Like you said, one person is not a trend, but if you speak to 50 people and half of them are telling you something, that is a very clear indicator that there is something else going on. So, fantastic.
Yeah, you have to know. I always tell our franchisees, you may love our answer or you may despise our answer, but you're going to get candor and honesty with our answer. And you may not always get candor from the other side when you ask the questions, but if you analyze those trends and continue to ask people what they think about X or Y or whatever, you can make your organization better in the long run.
I mean, that is absolutely needed. What what is the process of becoming a franchisee at the station? Kind of what is your onboarding for your new franchisers?
That's it's getting to know the franchisee. I want them to walk before they run. And it's really kind of doing what we're doing today. It's getting to know each other. It's talking about what are your goals? What are you looking for? Why Penn Station? And then once you understand that person and what they're looking for, then it's explaining the brand to them. This is what we do. This is what we offer. It's introducing them to the team. You sell franchising through what's called a franchise disclosure document. And, that explains everything about the franchisor itself. It talks about management, the products. There's what's called an item 19, and an item 19 is an earnings claim. And so we walk them through that. We require franchisees, in our case, we require franchisees to submit a P&L to us monthly. Um, and then we compile that data, and that's what we use to put in our item 19 so that you can see what system average sales are and the average profitability. And so the onboarding process, I want it to be a journey for them. It's getting to know them, making sure they're financially qualified. But we want to build a connection first before we start asking for all those things. I mean, I've said a couple of times, and I'm going to say it again. This is a long-term marriage, and both parties have to be extremely comfortable with each other. And I don't want them to treat us as a commodity, and I don't want to treat them as a commodity because, if we try to get somebody in the system and it's not going to work out, it just creates problems for everybody. It hurts our ability to sell restaurants down the road. And I don't want to see somebody invest in the business and wind up losing money because it wasn't good for them. And restaurants not for everybody, and franchising isn't for everybody because it's not passive. It's not real estate. It's hard. It's day to day. As I said, bringing in your revenue in $13 increments is really, really difficult. So making sure they understand that if they're not in the industry, and then if they are in the industry, I mean, we can give them comparisons about how we do against maybe, other concepts that they're familiar with.
Love it. It's so much information that I think directly relates to our specific, you know, people that are listening here. Like I said, it's all restaurant owners, things like that. That's why I'm really happy to have you on here, specifically as our first of our new little segment, because these are the questions that someone who is just starting out, like it's always greener on the other side. So someone coming in from another industry or someone starting maybe in a restaurant and then making their way up, like they wouldn't understand what it looks like. And you're absolutely right. Having the experience long term, like those people that are in place, they have policies in place. They have procedures in place and everything has to be perfect. I was in the military for 8 years, and one thing that I noticed from my time there is that everyone is just human. Like everyone is human. They're not any special breed of people. They're just normal people. The only difference is that there's so many policies in place that everyone knows exactly what they have to do in time. That's it. They're just normal people, and some of them are quite insane. The only reason it runs is because of all the policies in place. So if you get those group of psychos and they make it happen, it can work anywhere else too. And that's such an interesting concept that I think is undervalued in the restaurant industry specifically, because a lot of other traditional businesses, they understand that. Like that's something that they already utilize. That's why you have so many large corporations. But restaurants never really adopted that same idea. And it's just really interesting because talking to you, you guys clearly understand that concept. You utilize it, it works for you. Did the founder work in any other industries as well, or was he always a restaurant person?
Jeff was always came from an entrepreneurial family and, had a painting business in high school and college. And, when he graduated from college, he knew he wanted to work for himself, but didn't know necessarily what that meant. And he thought, you know what? I'm going to start a restaurant. And so he opened in Dayton Mall in Dayton, Ohio, a bagel shop, Jeffrey's Deli and Bagel. And, that's how really he kind of honed. I need systems, I need procedures, I need culture. It just came to fruition from that. I mean, your army analogy is a great analogy. And you asked me what would I do, if I were looking to get involved in franchising. You don't want you want to ensure the brand has a policy and a procedure for everything and how to execute at every level and not leave it up to your crew or yourself to figure out, because that's what you are getting from the franchisor over that period of that contract. And, you said it well. I mean, you want the cheesesteak in Cincinnati, Ohio to taste just like the cheesesteak in Richmond, Virginia. And so as a prospective franchisee, you want to know that there's a policy in place to do that and to teach people that. to not let people be left to their own devices. Because I'm sure in the Army unit you were in, if you didn't have policies and procedures and there's 100 guys, there's going to be 100 different things done 100 different ways because everybody's going to see the world differently.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It was the Navy, but exact same concept. It was just, if it wasn't specifically, these are what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. I mean, it was even like a very specific instruction on when we had to roll up our sleeves, when we had to change, when we had to do specific things. And it's that structure that makes such a huge organization still succeed. And I think that is something that any organization can adopt and use to grow themselves, starting small. I think the easiest, maybe not easiest, but the way that makes the most sense, at least to me, is when you're small, that's when you want to really start. You want to start finding out, okay, like I said, we have the product, this is the food, how are we doing this every time? And then from there, all right, let's make sure that we are 100% every single time. And it's really the people that you hire. I think that recruiting the personnel, that cannot be understated is just how important that is. Because you can have all the policies and procedures in place, but if you don't have the true team and the staff that are actually doing a good job, it doesn't matter. The people have to be there to actually do the role.
I have a franchisee very well respected in the system, and he told me one time, he said, "You know what, Craig, you can go, you, you can hire an idiot and you can train them, but at the end of the day, they're still an idiot." And it goes to your point about the recruitment process and how important that is. And, you asked about Jeff, and I think a story that's really relevant to what you're bringing up is Jeff had some success with his first Penn Station he opened, and he decided to open another one and had some success with that and opened a third. But what he found was, is he would go from restaurant one to restaurant two, that restaurant one would suffer when he wasn't there. And so that's what helped him hone. I need a policy for everything because, to your point, when you have one or two restaurants, you can outwork most of the problems. But when you start getting scale, you can't be everywhere all the time. And so you have to have a system for how do you make this cheesesteak or how do you blanch this fresh cut fry. And if you don't, then the person's going to try to figure it out on their own and it's not going to be consistent. And that's what Jeff learned. And that's where he said, I'm going to franchise this. I'm going to put an owner as close to the counter as possible. I'm going to give them a policy and a procedure for everything, except their employees. They're their employees. And I'm going to teach them how to execute on my model. And that's what we've been doing now going into 40 years next year.
Yeah, I mean that's so excellent. Yeah, I was working at a Domino's franchise as a general manager, um, and while doing it, I had heard this from my district manager because it was a pretty large franchise, and he said the store is only as good when you're not in it. So the store, like that's absolutely right. Like you can work in one location, and then when you're there, everything runs great. But as soon as you leave, what happens? And that definition is how good your store is. So, however good it is when you're not there, whoever the top leader is, that's how good it is. And then the only way to supplement that or to fix it is by having a solid team there, even when you're not there, having specific policies and procedures in place for them to know. The way that I see it, the less questions they have, the more success you're going to have. If they don't know how to do something, essentially you failed. Because if they don't know how to do something, they either have to reach out to you or they're going to do it wrong. Either way is wrong, right? So I think that the model is fantastic. The way that you guys handle it, the way that you go through everything. What is the big goal right now for Penn Station?
We really never focused on wanting to grow the brand. We did it more organically up until really around 2018. And what we said was we want to scale. I mean, we got 320 locations from 21 locations, and our goal really is to double in size over the next 7 to 8 years. And, we want to do that by staying in a concentric circle with Cincinnati, within 350 miles of Cincinnati, Ohio. We don't want to jump all over the country. We want to grow in the Midwest and then expand from there. And so, we're aggressively recruiting franchise candidates, trying to bring in people who we think fit the culture and would carry on the brand message well. So that's what we'd like to see. And we're not going to grow for the sake of growth. I mean, you have to do it with the right people and you have to do it in the right markets. And, for us to grow, you really need three things. I mean, you need logistics, which is getting the food there, you need oversight, and you need brand recognition. And if we were to open in Spokane, Washington today, nobody would know who we were. And our distributor would not want to deliver food to one restaurant in Spokane, Washington. And so that's why growing in this concentric circle outside of Cincinnati is so important. But, I would call it aggressive conservatism. We're not going to outrun our coverage. We don't want to grow for the sake of growth. We want each restaurant to be successful. So that's really our goal is to do that and attract franchisees. And we always ask a prospective candidate what you need to begin with the end in mind. Pull a Stephen Covey. What are you hoping to get out of this? And we try to get them to think, what's the next 20 years or 25 years or 30 years look like? That it's not about opening one restaurant. It's what's it look like long term for you. And if we can help them achieve their long term goals and they align with ours, then everybody's going to be successful, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really unique in itself. I know most other franchise organizations, it's just one store open up, and then if you run that one store, that's fine. But for you trying to have each one think so long term and then essentially develop their own kind of organization within the Penn Station franchise model, like that's really unique, I think, to you guys. I don't think I've heard that a lot in other organizations.
That's interesting. Yeah, I tell franchisees, when you're opening your first three or four restaurants, you're just building restaurants. And when you get to four and five, you're building a company. And it goes back to what you brought up. You have to have policy. Not only do we have policies and procedure for how to execute the model, they need policies and procedures for how they execute their company. That's just critical. And if you've got a good brand and you've got a good model and you put that culture in place and those systems and procedures, then, it doesn't guarantee success, but it gives you a greater opportunity for success.
Well, I would just like to say, Craig, thank you so much for coming. I would like to say as well, we got the 57-minute mark. You said you wouldn't have anything to talk about for an hour. That is a gross understatement because I think the information that you shared here was extremely valuable. I think it was extremely important stuff. I, for one, learned a lot from it, and I thank you so much for coming out here.
No, I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here, and it was a great experience, and hopefully gave you some nuggets that are useful today.
Absolutely. It gave me nuggets, and I'm sure it gave some of our own clients here who are listening nuggets as well. So if you stuck with us this long, I truly appreciate it. If you like the content, please rate the show, and if you're feeling a little crazy, maybe share it with someone.